All right. Peace and greetings, YouTubers. Shameik Moore, you tried it. So before I even get into the actual content, let's play the video and then we'll talk.
Resources. He went into Rosa Parks, sitting at the front of the bus, right? What we don't know as a black community is that there were his family, Dr. Claude Anderson, had black-owned taxi cabs and black buses that could have been used during that time. You know, now this is something that a lot of people might not want to hear. I should probably have this conversation with an OG, but what I'm getting to with that is
You see, this is why I say do not give all your time and energy to celebrities when it comes to social issues, things regarding race, the black plight, the black experience, anti-blackness, systematic racism, anything like that, because a lot of times celebrities just don't have the range to carry that conversation. And so I don't know why everybody always flocks to hear what they have to say, because a lot of times these celebrities, they have influence, they have an audience, but they think that that makes it interchangeable with information and knowledge and insight. And a lot of times they keep leading people into foolery. Y'all keep following and fooling with these celebrities if you want to. They're going to have you hiding under a glass table during an earthquake. Keep playing. So with everything that he said, one, I do want to say one thing. It works my nerves when people have a simple as that mentality for something that they weren't around to experience, something that they weren't around for, something that's not even from their era. And I say that because in 2020, any critique that you have of what black people were doing in the 1950s or the 1960s, you're looking at through the lens of 2020, through the lens of a generation that was born after the civil rights movement, born after slavery, born after Jim Crow, born after all of the people in the previous eras had to deal with all of that foolery and senselessness and everything else that happened, so you could stand on their shoulders just to spew that foolishness on this internet, on this fine day. So again, it's like your perspective is already privileged, just because you didn't have to live during that era. So you don't get the luxury, you don't get to show up and say what they did wrong. Because one, if you were in those same shoes, you wouldn't be thinking in 1954 the way that you're thinking in 2020. Because one, these are history lessons we've learned from things that happened in the past, and the lessons that you learn from whatever happens in the past is supposed to build how you see the world in the future, so that the atrocities that happened in the past don't happen again. So it's always silly to me when people look back at something that's happened in the past to a marginalized group, to an oppressed group, and try to criticize how they were oppressed or how they dealt with being oppressed. Sit down. So where do we start with him? So one of the, while I'm at that, it's almost like when people start talking a bit about slavery. I wasn't ever going to be no slave. I was going to be beating this person up. I was going to be beating up that. And you always notice that it's always an individualistic kind of approach, which is what I want to get into, because I want to talk about collectives and community thinking. And so it's always an individualistic approach. Yeah, I would have beat up the slave master and everything. And it's kind of like, okay, but we need to talk about what was also happening in slavery. So let's say you beat up the slave master. Okay, you beat him up. Now let's talk about what happens next. You get castrated. They rape your wife, they sell your kids, they probably beat up your mama, kill her, send her off, all because you wanted to be the vigilante all on your own. There were a bunch of uprisings and everything like that, but the people on the plantation had to think as a collective, because they recognized that individually, one person at a time, they couldn't do it all. Even if you want to gas up Nat Turner had an entire strategy. He was thinking collectively. He couldn't do it just on his own. And so it was like, whoever is down with me, what you want to do. If you want to talk Underground Railroad, it was a system that was in play. Like, when it comes to oppression, trying to get out of a system that's screwing people over, you need numbers. Unfortunately, you're not going to get far doing it by yourself. And then let's just say you break out and you run away. I don't know, you were a slave in Virginia. It's March. You decided to run away. What are you going to do at 4 in the morning when it's 22 degrees outside? Where are you going? You know what I mean? Like, those are things you have to think about when you always spend so much time trying to criticize the people who were in systems. That's why I had so many beefs with the people who wanted to do the whole slavery was a choice conversation. But let me stay focused on this. So he brings up the bit where he's talking about, oh, well, what the black people over there didn't know at the time was, or may not have known, there were black-owned taxi companies. And it's like, sir, during that time period, there was black-owned everything because the country was still segregated. Black people had to have their own everything. One, I also found it funny that he said the bit where, maybe I don't need to talk about this with y'all. I need to talk about it with the OGs. I'm like, here y'all go. Now you want to have secret conversations. You want to be the gatekeepers of information, and you want to go in and have secret conversations because you think the rest of us are too stupid to be on whatever waveform you think you're on. And so going back to the taxi bit, let's kind of dissect how all of this comes together, because really I'm like, Rosa Parks is minding her business in her grave and you done brought her up. I was confused when I saw her name trending today or tonight. I was like, it's not her birthday, and I don't think this is the day that she died. And then I click and I see him talking about, what he was talking about. Rosa Parks could have just went ahead and took a cab instead of sitting on that bus. Like, this has been a wild 2020, but staying focused because I'm all over the place right now. Sorry guys, I've done like 3 videos in one day. If you're talking about black-owned taxi companies, yes, they existed, but you have to put this into a conversation with the right context. What's happening in Alabama in the 1950s? One, everything is segregated, but do you really think it makes sense? Like, what you'd have to look at is for black people collectively in Birmingham at the time, Montgomery at the time, the bus route, unfortunately, is the safest way to pass through the white side of town going back into the black side of town and vice versa. And you also have to look at the fact that, one, we know that redlining existed. But one of the things that happened with redlining, because sometimes people think it was like, okay, black side of town here, white side of town here, this is here, that is here. No, sometimes redlining meant you sprinkle some black folks over here and keep them in that pocket, black folks in this pocket here, black folks in that pocket. All of this right here is white, black folks in this corner, and now they got to get to their corners and figure out how to do it. The bus route was the safest way to get to those corners without being harassed a lot of times, because you have to think about this is the era of sundown towns. This is the era of people being on the wrong side of town at the wrong time, getting dragged up out of their cars. It's dangerous to be in a black-owned taxi cab on the white side of town with black people in the car. The black-owned taxi cabs at the time often were pretty much maneuvering within the black portions of town. I mean, there was still some that would definitely go here and there, but those are some things to think about in addition to the fact that, hey, the bus is just cheaper than a cab. But what I want to get at is this. You have to talk about the conversation of collective thinking. So in 1954, almost 2 years before they even got the bus boycott jumping, the black collective in Montgomery had already sent a letter to the mayor and said, hey, we are 75% of your ridership. Because again, I want to have this conversation because Shameik definitely started talking about black people and victimhood and how we need to start not being oppressed and not be crybabies and figure out ways. So boom, here's the challenging victimhood. They said, listen, we're 75% of your ridership. You don't have a bus company without us. So either you start giving us the rights that we're demanding, or we're just going to stop riding because y'all tripping. That was already before Rosa Parks. That was before Claudette Colvin. It was before all of that. They had already put that out there. The verbiage was there. The conversation was there. The threat was there. Mayor and crew didn't take it seriously. The bus is still tripping. They doing whatever they want to do. Okay, cool. So we fast forward. Rosa Parks happens. Everything. I was about to say. I just said her name a second ago. Claudette Colvin happens. Or COVID happens. All these people have already done everything, right? And so bus boycott happens. Initially, the bus boycott was only supposed to be for one day. But because there was so much outrage because of who Rosa Parks was, it definitely just started to gain its traction in the area. And boom, you fast forward, it's an 18-month boycott. And so there's a few things that happened, because this is where I thought he was going to go when he started talking about the black-owned taxi cabs. We recognize that what black people did in order to still be able to maneuver around the city is they started their own carpool system, and then they also had the black-owned taxi systems helping as well, because they decided to think as a collective. You have to ask yourself, what would carry more weight? Rosa Parks just deciding I ain't getting on the bus that day. Y'all got it. Like, I'm not about to be no punk. I'll just take a cab. Forget the rest of y'all. Or collectively thinking as a group and saying, well, if all of us get off together and we do this thing, that definitely kicks up some more dirt. It shakes a bigger table. All right. Because if it were just Rosa on her own and she took a cab, that's not shaking the table. That's like knocking a cookie that falls off the table, the dog eats it and run. If you want to flip that table, you're going to have to do it right. You need numbers. In order to take down a system that's corrupt, you need numbers. That's why when you do that whole individual thinking, it doesn't get anywhere. And so, plus, Rosa Parks at the time was a community leader and an activist and everything like that. How would she look? It's almost like, how like when your friends want to go out or something, they want to go to the club or something like that. I'm not really a clubber like that, but you done laid down on that couch or that bed. You done got comfortable. The blanket is the right temperature. The pillow is just at the right element of pressure and everything. And the room temperature is perfect. You start to nod and everything. You done forgot you supposed to go, and you start telling them, who's all there? Yeah. Okay, well, y'all go ahead and get there. Call me when y'all get there. I'm gonna meet y'all there. You know you ain't going. That's what it would have looked like if Rosa just said, well, the hell with everything, I'll do this on my own. And so, mind you, they were already planning to do this boycott, and Rosa was already planning to pretty much have her stance and have her protest moment anyway. Not that specific day, but it was already in the plans to do so. And so there's even more, because what happens is this. The bus ridership drops by 69% during this boycott. The bus companies are struggling. And so this is where you see a pattern of something. So that's why when people try to put the burden of not being oppressed on black people, I always say you forget that the oppressor still has other tricks. And so what ends up happening is the bus companies are struggling, and so white Americans from outside of Alabama, including the ones in Alabama, are so outraged that black people have decided to boycott the bus, because it's like, how dare they, that they start sending money to the bus company so they can stay in business. I was about to say there was a great quote. This is not a great quote, but there was a quote that I read here, and this was from somebody who sent some money, and it said, excuse my language, please, don't let the niggers have their way about riding your cars. One person from North Carolina wrote, if you give in to them, the whole South will go black. I believe if you hold out, they all will eventually come crawling back to the buses. And so you see a pattern, because that even happens in 2020. One of the interesting things to me is a lot of times when you see a police brutality case or you see a racist case where there's a black victim, a lot of times you see a lot of people in the white collective start donating. George Zimmerman was living real large for a few years after he killed Trayvon Martin. He didn't even need a job because he had so much in donations. You see it all the time. And so that's still happening now. And so that's the kind of system that they were up against. And so going back to my point, the bus boycott is so successful that it brings pretty much half of the town to its knees, because now you have all these bus drivers who are getting furloughed, who are getting laid off. The buses are not running the same routes. Some of these routes they don't have to do anymore. And so what does that mean? You have these men who are now losing their jobs, who are not making the same amount that they were once making. This is still the era of single income households, where a lot of times the wives didn't work. There would be some wives that were teachers or seamstress or had some jobs, but a lot of times people lived off one income because that was just America at the time. People could afford to have a nice house, have a decent car, pay their kids tuition for school, and go on vacations all on one income, because inflation had not done its number on America yet. That's just the way things were. But now you have bus drivers who are not bringing in the same amount of money, who are trying to run a household with no money. All of a sudden, the economy starts going down in the city. A lot of the white businesses are starting to struggle. A lot of the businesses that depended on traffic from the buses, when they would stop by the shopping centers, or stop by the restaurants, or stop by the little random stores that people might go to before they go back to their side of town, if they were allowed on that side, and anything like that, or even people who were working on that side of town, all of those dynamics changed. And so the bus company goes through its struggle. You know, we fast forward. I'm not going to tell this whole story because everybody should know the story by now. But you fast forward, boom, it goes to court. It's ordered that the buses can no longer be segregated. Black people, you are now allowed to have rights. You don't have to get off the bus when you enter from the front to pay and then walk around to the back and get in that way. You don't have to give up your seat. You don't have to be harassed. All kind of things like that. Guess what happens? Because like I said, there's still tricks up people's sleeve. The bus line has to still shut down for additional weeks afterwards, because there was so much backlash from white people. I mean, it was to the point where people had shot bullets into Martin Luther King's house. People had beat up some of the black people who were getting off the bus because they didn't like the new way of doing things. What do you think was happening when a white person sat next to a black person on the bus? Or a black person sat next to a white person at the front of the bus? Okay, lots of violence. It was even to the point where somebody had a sniper gun and shooting into the buses. So they had to close the busing system and shut it down for a few weeks, which is so funny, because literally, if you just fast forward earlier a few months, they're saying, please help the bus companies. We're struggling. We need help. We don't have enough money to stay afloat. And now all of a sudden, because black people won this specific case, white folks got mad and said, well, hell, we'll shut the bus company down. Nobody will ride the bus. Okay, it goes back to what I said, and I want to say that was the Amy Cooper or it was the George Floyd video, where people will give up their livelihood just to be right when they're sitting in a space of racism. That's how things work. And so, Shameik, I'll give you kudos for at least wanting to open and expand your mind, but you got to get the stuff right. You got to piece everything right, and you got to have the right context. Especially if you're going to be somebody on a public platform with an audience, don't lead people into foolery. And one is just disrespectful. She could have just caught a cab. But let's talk about, what if Rosa Parks did catch a cab that day? Would the bus boycott have been successful? Would the outrage and the media frenzy and just everything that came out of that, would it have been the same? Because when we talk about Claudette Colvin, like we said before, she had already done the exact same thing. It didn't get the same kind of notoriety because a lot of people just felt she wasn't the person to lead that kind of charge, pretty much. And she wasn't the only one, and there were so many people who refused to give up their seats on the bus. The issue and anything surrounding Rosa Parks was that this was already something that was calculated because she was a public figure. She had some pull. And so they knew that she could shake the table a little bit, and it would be something a bit bigger when it did happen. But again, let's just say that Rosa decided that day, I'm going to just take a taxi. What would we be talking about right now? Would the busing system have had the same outcome? Would they have had the same success with that boycott? Again, collective thinking as a community. It was a community strategy with how everything kind of aligned. And so when people start thinking as individuals and saying, well, the hell with everybody, I'll just do this myself and I got it because I know so much, as if we have not been living in the same cycle of repeated history as long as we've been on the planet. What you doing? Come on, man. Do better. Anyway, I'm out. Subscribe.
They said they couldn't ride to the music cause it's way too melodic. They despise anything that makes you feel erotic. Take a mile past the strip, the windows down to the scene. Stepping out on the weekend as the cruise routine. Cause they act up, call back up, and all the girls are mad up. The DJ spins the record and the lines begin to stack up. Take a step into another deeper dimension while you balance out the moments that should give you attention. Say, hey, you such an actor, taking pictures faster, seeking validation from the ones you used to laugh at. Wait, here's a question that they never really ask us. If you had